Welcome to the Procurement Pulse, where we talk about what's actually happening in supply chain and procurement. AI versus reality, talent gaps no job board can fix, and the supply chain orgs that are going to win over the next 2 years. Real conversations with people who have been on both sides, building teams, solving problems, and staying ahead of what's coming. Now I've got with me here today Evan. He's one of our senior recruiters at Supply Chain Recruiting. And for today's episode, Evan is going to be our guide, guiding us through the episode, asking smart questions, and making sure we all stay on track. Hey, Evan, how are you doing?
Hey, Friddy, I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. And before we start, maybe a little bit of a personal touch. You're right now in Barcelona, is that right?
That's right.
How did that happen?
Well, I luckily fell into the lap of this guy named Friddy on LinkedIn, and he allows me to work from wherever I want as long as I fill positions. So we've continued that understanding for almost 3 years now, and it's worked well for both of us, I hope. Definitely worked well for me.
Very nice. All right, maybe give us a little bit of an introduction. How did you get to be a supply chain recruiter? Where did you start your career? All that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my career started in the operations side of things as a gym manager with a large national brand, Crunch Fitness. I worked at I think the largest now franchise group, Fitness Ventures. And during my time there, the organization was going through a lot of growth. And we actually had a little bit of a change at my specific club, leaving essentially me in charge of quite a few duties, including all HR and procurement functions, also forecasting for inventory management. I was pretty much doing it all. One of our things that fell into me and I thought was really interesting was negotiating with our suppliers for F&B. I controlled all the F&B spend at the club. So that gave me a real, I guess, first glance into the day-to-day life of procurement. After about 3 years there, I was there up until about COVID happened. Obviously, gyms had to shut down and I was out looking for a job. And there was a staffing agency near me that I was just going to look for a temporary
Who
position.
was it?
That was Ronstad.
All right.
And Ronstad, I went to go internal or I went to go interview with one of their staffing managers for a manufacturing position, again, just to hold me over while I was looking for my next career pivot. And they actually ended up hiring me internally. So that's kind of where I got my first start as a recruiter, working pretty much exclusively with manufacturing clients, a lot of hourly to salary, low, mid-level manager positions across all facets of manufacturing. One of the things that I saw was that my experience handling some of the procurement duties in my previous role really allowed me to dive into questions deeper with candidates. And I excelled there in my first role. I was promoted to work with our strategic accounts team on the technical side of things within 6 months. And then I was there for, again, about another year. And then I found Friddy. We had a couple of discussions and I decided to move over to his team where he is building something special. I think really giving some insight on the supply chain industry, not only as a recruiter, but also a former professional. And Freddie, why don't you tell us, I guess, what separates Scope different from other recruiting agencies?
Having worked in both large corporate recruiting agencies like Randstad and a boutique supply chain recruiting firm like Scope, what do you think is the main difference?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. At Ronstad, I definitely felt that I was able to exceed in my position because of my on the job experience. And it also accompanied with definitely other things. But I felt when I was speaking with candidates and hiring managers, I was able to ask them questions and feel pain points as someone who had actually been in their shoes, been on the job doing the procurement duties, doing the operational duties that some of these managers were doing. And I felt that not many of my fellow recruiters actually had that ability. A lot of them came straight out of college with like a business degree or, maybe even another study. degree, but not a lot of them had actual on the job experience. And a lot of them, this was their first job. So a lot of them I felt would really blast and just send candidates, that maybe would be a 60, 70% match over to clients. And, when you're working with large recruiting firms, I feel like that is kind of expected. But when you're working with scope, we are boutique, we are niche, we are focusing and dialed in on the roles that we're recruiting for. I think that our intake calls really set us apart from right in the beginning. I've been on many intake calls with Freddie, and from his experience, as a global category manager, he's able to really dive in and ask great questions, not only about the role, but how the role fits into the organization. Where is this role going to fix the organization's pain points that is currently happening? And I think that that really gives us an edge. One, to be able to tell the candidates a story about the company. I feel like it's, an easier sell to candidates, when you have this additional information about the company that you're able to provide. And I also feel that it shows the hiring managers that we're not just another, recruiting firm, that we actually have this in the ground knowledge of the positions we're recruiting for. So I think that's what sets us
How are
apart.
the processes different at Randstad? Is there a lot of repurposing of candidates? Is there a lot of push of getting candidates over quickly, even so they aren't a great fit? Do you have a large database of active candidates where you just pull and send them from? And how much custom and how much, attention to detail are you putting into, and not just right in your role, obviously at Randstad, but overall, what difference do you see there in between like company like Randstad that's working on thousands of roles, working with thousands of candidates at a time versus us where we have a few dozen roles and a few dozen select partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Randstad is a massive company. I think they are the global leader in HR talent services to be outsourced, right? And at any given time, I think there is, at least in the US database, around 30 to 40 million candidates that have been included their group, uploaded their resume to their website, who have applied on a job posting through one of Randstad's many subsidiary job boards. And you're definitely incentivized to reuse candidates. I felt that, of course, you were always looking for the right match for the job, but speed is everything. And, we had strict benchmarks to hit week over week. For some clients, like in my position, when I was promoted to the Fortune 100 team, a lot of our clients, we had to have at least 3 candidates over to them within 2 to 3 days. We called those SLA dates. And this was in our contract with the client. So, of course, when new roles came open, you immediately had to hit the ground running and get them resumes. And that was definitely a pressure that was put onto us. So it definitely created an environment of, hunger and, hunting, I would say. We definitely put
That, I mean, from our experience, 3 days, if you're going after passive candidates that aren't active in the market, even if I reach out to them today, they're going to be busy. They're not going to have time to jump on a call day one, day two, day three. They might not even have a resume ready because the great candidates aren't out there with polished resumes hunting for jobs. They are passive. They are working, and they might get approached by recruiters multiple times a year, but they take very few of those calls. And when you do get those high performers, those top talents, right? I mean, they're not going to be ready in 3 days. They're going to take a day or two to schedule a call. They're going to take a day or two to update their resume, talk to family about the opportunity, make sure it fits their career and their career path. So if you want quality candidates, I would say it's almost impossible to get those within 3 days. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a big challenge. And like you said, especially on the top talent, at Scope, I feel like one of our big things is we almost always deliver, passive candidates. And that's a big push for us, because again, we're not looking for just anyone to go into a job, right? A lot of times our clients are partnering with us because they want to elevate their organization in some way, some shape. And the supply chain positions are just so crucial nowadays with the ever changing, landscape geopolitically, and even more so now, technology is, we might get into this episode of AI and how that's changing even in our job on the recruiting side, and how I was changing even hiring processes for candidates. I think that with scope, again, our on the ground experience allows us to sell these positions for these passive candidates, because they're not just going to talk, like Freddie said, they're not talking to anyone. You have to be strategic on when, how, and why you're going to reach out to them. Sometimes even touching base with them multiple times to even see if they're still interested when your first message maybe got a kickback, but you're able to provide more information because we have gotten insight from these hiring managers that maybe sell them on it. And that's happened to me multiple times. I think Freddie can definitely attest to that. And that would be the main difference I've seen, because again, the top talent, typically they're very well compensated. Obviously can't say that for everybody, but they're in a good space in their current roles, and they're not going to leave just for anything. So
Top talent isn't out there applying for roles. Top talent is busy working in their roles, and top talent, especially manager level up, they get recruited. They are not out there hunting on job boards, clicking apply on jobs. Yeah, the very best just don't have to do that. And I think, right, obviously there's always economic changes that might change, right, if the economy tanks, if we all of a sudden unemployment goes up. But over the last 10 years where things have been steady and really we haven't seen any dips in unemployment, yeah, the top talent isn't out there necessarily applying for roles. I would say, right, when we post a position, and we do rarely, I think we have 2 LinkedIn job slots that are more so marketing than they are in the hope of finding candidates. Out of every 100 applicants we get, I think maybe 1, 2, maximum 3 are worth talking to. The other 97 just wasting your time. And then a lot of times, even those 2 or 3 that you find online that you have a conversation with, I mean, maybe 30% out of those are actually worth submitting. So in the end, you're probably 1 out of 100 candidates that are worth talking to. And I think we're already very good at shifting through applicants and knowing, right, out of those 100, 3 is who we might be talking to. Some other recruiting firms or some internal recruiter that aren't in the weeds of things and doing this every day, and specifically for those supply chain roles, right? They might talk to 10, 15 of those and spend even more time talking to candidates that in the end aren't a fit. And we really found that going after those passive candidates, it really helps with our retention rate. And we have one of the best retention rates in the business. And that's largely due to targeting those passive top performing candidates in the market. And like you said, it starts with our intake call to make sure we have a really solid candidate profile and we know exactly what we're looking for. And then it goes into asking the right questions during our interview process to make sure that those candidates align with that candidate profile. And I think something else we're going to get later into the episode is how we can use scorecards or interview guides to make sure that within an organization, the interview process is consistent and we don't have different hiring managers interviewing for different skills because internally we weren't clear from the get-go of what is the purpose of hiring for this role and what are the specific needs that we're trying to fill by placing this role. So we'll get into that, I think, a little bit later in the episode. But yeah, appreciate you telling us a little bit more about your beginning there with Randstad and how I think some of those larger organizations differ from scope recruiting.
absolutely, absolutely. I think the viewers would love to learn a little bit more about you, your background and how Scope came to be.
Yeah, obviously born and raised in Alabama, as you can tell. No, so originally from Germany. I came to the United States to get my bachelor's in North Carolina. Eventually ended up in Europe again for grad school and then started a global supply chain rotational program where I ended up with Thomas and Betts in Memphis when ABB bought Thomas and Betts and became a global commodity manager there, overseeing 80, 90 million, really in a range of different categories. Like everything that wasn't under somebody's category, like resin, metal, PCBs, like all the other stuff that nobody really knew what to do with, somehow got all put onto my plate. So I had a little bit of indirect. I had mobile phones and negotiated a new mobile phone contract for about 1,000 employees. I did castings. I had travel on there. I had a little bit of raw material, aluminum in there, cable harnesses. So kind of a mix and match of direct, indirect, finished parts. And it really gave me a good insight into the different categories and into the different ways supply chain functions, because indirect is different from direct material, right? Direct material is material that goes into the manufacturing process, and you can't just change a vendor. You have to make sure, right, that the parts are qualified, the vendors are pre-qualified, and to make a change in parts is much more complicated on the direct side than it is on indirect. I can change a phone contract from T-Mobile to Verizon, and I know everybody's gonna have service, and everybody is gonna be able to text, and no manufacturing process is going to stop because I switched somebody from T-Mobile over to Verizon. Parts is a different story, and I think there's certainly differences in the personalities, I think, as well, for people working in supply chain between the indirect and the direct part. And the direct definitely has seen a lot more attention, I think, as the companies have made sure that over the last 10, 15 years that really the cost has come down on those parts, that they are optimized, right? They're engineered to a certain standards. They are within tolerances, and then everything that goes into making sure that if you buy parts, they work within your product and in your production process. But on the indirect side, right, marketing still a lot of time gets handled by marketing. HR services a lot of times still gets handled by HR. So when procurement gets tasked with reducing costs in those areas, I think there's a lot of change management that needs to happen for some of those groups to give up some of their power that they had of making the decisions on who they want to work with. And now all of a sudden marketing has to work with procurement and kind of work together on finding those vendors. So I've kind of seen all of that in my time there as global category manager. That really gave me a good understanding of all the different facets within supply chain and procurement. And yeah, we really started with my wife Melissa. We started scope recruiting about 9 years ago. She got into supply chain recruiting before I did, and she also was a global category manager at ABB, and she was more on the logistics side, the resin, the paper, and the packaging. So a little bit different area, but very, very much still that very strategic sourcing process. And when we moved to Asheville, North Carolina, she joined a boutique supply chain recruiting firm there, and quickly realized that while they were a boutique supply chain, nobody there had a supply chain background. So after working there for about 2 years, we decided to start scope recruiting, really with the idea that all of our recruiters should have that hands-on supply chain operations experience to make sure that we can ask the right questions both to the hiring managers and to potential candidates, to make sure that when we send over candidates, they're not just a 70% fit, but they are a 90, 95% fit for all the candidates we submit. So yeah, that's how we started scope recruiting, always with the vision from the very beginning, right? We don't only want to be boutique, but we want to be boutique and former experts and professionals in the field. Yeah, and I've heard many stories from candidates and nightmare stories from candidates where they feel like, right, they are a logistics analyst and they get reached out to be a buyer, or they are a planning manager and they're asked to be a procurement manager, or things like that, right? Where if you're just working on supply chain roles 10% of your time, you might see that a materials manager and a supply chain manager aren't the same thing. So heard many stories from candidates who said, hey, I'm so glad that we're talking to somebody who actually understands those roles and understands what we're doing, and can ask me intelligent questions and make sure I'm actually a fit for the role. So I think that's worked out really well for us. And yeah, here we are 7 years, 8 years now into scope recruiting, and We have some fantastic clients growing year over year. And I think we're looking to start this podcast series here to really invite some of our former and current clients and kind of share their story, share what's going on in the supply chain market, and also invite potentially new clients, new candidates, and get to learn from them, see what's going on with their organizations, what they see is happening in the talent market, in the supply chain market. How are they preparing for tariffs? How are they making sure they can be made in America? And what does that do to their supply chain and to the talent they need? And on top of all of that, right, how is AI affecting all of this? We're seeing a lot of candidates asking on forums, on calls we have, hey, is my job still going to be here 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What will AI replace? And yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting topics we're going to dive into here in our podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. AI is the big talking point. Any sector that we are in now, everyone wants to know, what is AI going to do? Is it coming for my job? Is it going to make everyone's job obsolete? And I definitely think, and Freddie, maybe you can expand on this, that AI is going to, I feel like, free up a lot of people's time for their actual human to human interaction in the context of supply chain roles. How do you feel about it?
I would agree. I think there's roles that are going to be greatly enhanced by AI, and then there's going to be roles that are going to be replaced for the most part by AI. And those roles have to morph into something else or find a different role. And I think the repetitive, what we call tactical procurement tasks, are going to be replaced by AI in the next 5 years. I have no doubt about that. There's no reason for an individual to set up and send out POs, set and analyze reorder points, follow up on invoices, all the tactical, minuscule tasks that are done today gonna be automated to a 90% degree where you might have somebody in the end, a human, double check and just click approve to make sure it's done right. But in the end, AI is going to be much better at that. They're not going to make mistakes. They're not going to miss anything. Nothing is going to slip through the cracks. So AI is just going to be much more efficient at that than we are going to be. On the flip side, right, the strategic side, the vendor qualifications, a lot of times that involves visiting a vendor physically, being on site, seeing what their manufacturing site looks like. That's not going to be done by AI. And the same with, I think, the negotiation part. Supply chain really affects everything within an organization. Without supply chain, nothing gets started and nothing gets done. So supply chain, and I think for most companies have realized that, and right, we have supply chain professionals becoming CEOs. I think most well-known one is Tim Cook, who came from the supply chain side at Apple, is now been leading supply chain for leading Apple for a long, long time. And really, I think it just shows the importance of supply chain, and having AI take over some of those aspects is just not going to happen, right? I think it's the vendor negotiation part. Yes, AI might be able to run an e-auction, but in the end, right, when it comes down to approving parts, to selecting the right vendors, splitting the risk mitigation or splitting the risk between different vendors, how do I want to set up geopolitically? Do I want to have everybody of my vendors in Asia, or do I want somebody in Europe or in North America, or do I pick an American vendor and an overseas vendor? AI is certainly going to be able to give recommendations there, but
Right.
this is going to be the decisions that are going to be still made by people that really have a deep understanding of supply chain, of macroeconomic trends, the company's vision, and the company's idea of where they want to be, and it's going to be enhanced by AI, and they're going to be more effective. But there's a lot of different aspects within supply chain that are still going to be human managed.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I definitely agree. One of the things that I feel like candidates are speaking with me about when I'm on calls with them, and we are talking about, the future of supply chain when it comes to things like AI. What do you tell candidates when they ask, "What could I focus on if I, want to be safe in my role, 5 years down the line. Is there anything you're telling them to upskill or any certifications, any technical things you are giving them insights on or recommending for them to be ahead of the game when AI comes knocking?
Yeah, there certainly is, but a general interest in AI, I think, helps. Somebody who's interested, who's playing around with AI, who's using ChatGPT, Gemini, maybe even personally, right? Has it replaced your search bar yet? I find myself that probably 50, 60% of the time, instead of going into the Google search bar, I'm now going into ChatGPT and asking AI to do the work for me. And I think just having that exposure gives you a really good sense of what AI can do and what it still lacks, and what still needs that human touch. So I think being able to prompt AI is going to be a great skill to have, to know how to talk to AI to get the results you're looking for. And I'm sure that's going to get easier and easier over time. But right now, there is a little bit of an art to getting those AI tools to do what you want. And you have to phrase it in the right way, and you have to give it the right structure and prompts to operate in, because otherwise it might go into a direction you don't want it to go. Yeah, I think the more exposure you have with AI in your job at home, the more you get used to using those prompts and to giving that in those instructions to AI, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to get a big data set, and just going to get more and more data, and people who are able to effectively utilize AI to make sense of the data, to tell a story with that data, they're gonna be the one who are gonna be irreplaceable. And people who are still there trying to filter their Excel table manually, probably gonna get left behind. So yeah, I think just a general interest in AI and working with AI will prepare you very well for what's to come. And other than that, I think in more traditional supply chain sense, it's the strategic portion of supply chain that's going to be relevant. So if you're currently sitting there and you're spending 80% of your time issuing POs and manually setting up reorder points and manually following up on invoices, it's probably a good time to see what you can do in terms of training, in terms of certifications, work with your organization and see what trainings they have available to prepare you for to become more strategic. You don't want to be in a role that's tactical in 5 years. And I think it's gonna be some industries that are gonna be ahead of the time, some industries it's gonna take a little bit longer, like automotive typically, right, is at the very forefront of procurement processes, and they're gonna be there and making sure everything they can automate is automated, because they buy 1,000 parts and 1 million of them. So it's not that difficult to automate that type. It's more difficult, right, if you buy 1 million parts and only 1,000 of them. But even then, AI is gonna be invaluable. It just might take a little bit longer for those industries to adapt to AI. What I would say to candidates, right, is
I think you can get registered as like a power, I don't know. Are you a registered power user on GPT? Maybe you could become an official power user down the line.
yeah, right. And I know, and I'm sure the ERP systems already have AI in it, but they're gonna adopt more and more AI within the ERP system, right? So it's gonna be built into those tools. So being a power user and being very comfortable with using your ERP systems and knowing about the tools that are in there. And we can see it right on our end with LinkedIn, with the tools we are using. We're getting more and more AI in our tools, and LinkedIn is trying to tell us, hey, this candidate is a great match for your role. And let's be open, most of the time they're not. There's still a lot to learn, I think, for AI before it becomes really relevant in some of those more creative tasks, right? Like we have evaluating a candidate against a job profile. It sounds like it's a fairly straight up process, but I've come to find that it sets recruiters apart. Like people who can really look at a resume and a profile and say, this person matches what my client is looking for, is really most of the time what sets a recruiter apart, besides the ability to connect with human beings. But to this day, I've not seen an AI tool that can match it. I think it's a very creative process, but besides just looking at the skills and what's on there, I think there's a lot of implied meaning when you look at it. When you see candidates hop jobs every 2 years, right? And you look at it, okay, it was 2020. It's more, you can explain it more because COVID was happening. So maybe I'm okay with that. But then you see that somebody went from a manager down to an analyst, and you think maybe, okay, what's going on here that we went from a manager to an analyst? We've changed industries for some reason. There's a lot of experience and expertise that's required to judge if a profile really fits a company's needs. And every company is going to have a little bit different needs and way they evaluate candidates. And some companies want candidates that have been in a lot of different industries because it means they're adaptable. They can adapt to new situations. Other companies, they want somebody who has been in the same industry for 20 years because they need that deep experience. So for one, I think it's a little bit bad data in, bad data out. So if the company doesn't have a very good profile or candidate profile, then an AI is never going to be able to match it, because a lot of times we need to help clients define what that candidate profile looks like. And without that, right, AI is never going to be able, if you say, right, supply chain manager, there could be 100 different ways on how you go with that search. So for us, I think the creative part lays in recognizing and identifying, yes, they want a supply chain manager, but the procurement portion is going to be a lot more heavier weighted than the logistics portion of the supply chain manager in this scenario. The industry experience is more important than the longevity. They need to have maybe a certain runway left. So there's a lot of creative parts that goes into being able to accurately judge candidate profiles against a company fit. And that's something AI is still very bad at. And I think it's going to take quite a bit of time because AI gets good at that. Because surprisingly, I think it turns out it's a very creative process. And I think the recruiters that are good at that, and I know Evan, you are very good at that too, is it just makes our life a whole lot easier because we don't have to talk to 10 candidates to find one good one. We can look at their profile, we can look at their resumes, and we can judge much quicker if candidates are great or not. I mean, like, how often do I come to you and I tell to you, this is the guy, they're gonna hire him just by looking at the resume, and they're gonna end up hiring him. And it's just right, if you do something for that long, you just, at some point, very rarely am I wrong on that. It happens more often that I think, okay, I think maybe a candidate isn't that great, and we send him over because you were like, no, I talked to him, trust me, he's great. And he didn't look great on paper because, right, maybe they just didn't put in the effort of making their resume look great.
Right.
So you might be able to find great candidates with bad resumes, but the flip side is rarely true. When I look at a resume and I feel a candidate is great, they almost never turn out to be bad candidates.
And to hit on that point, I do think in recent memory, some of the ones that you have said that candidates are great fit for the role, and maybe the company did not end up hiring that candidate. A lot of these companies are still looking for candidates to come into those roles. And I think that segues us nicely into maybe our next topic is, speaking of candidate profiles and scorecards, how are we using AI in our conversations with our clients to help them, craft the best profile for a potential candidate coming in, or maybe a scorecard that they can use to grade these candidates on interviews?
Yeah, great question. And I think for us, AI really is a data collection and data analyzing tool. We don't have AI make decisions. We don't have AI do sourcing or talk to candidates. For us, it's really running in the background, recording our conversations that we have with hiring managers, with HR managers, with candidates, and then help us filter and structure those transcript and that data, because that's what AI is really good at, right? AI is really good at tracking data, at analyzing data, and saying this is the data, right? And this is, I think, where AI really saves us a lot of time, because we start our process by creating an ideal candidate profile. For every search we take the intake call we have, we take the job description, and we utilize AI to create an ideal candidate profile with it. And we have our AI structured in a way that at every point, AI is asking us, okay, for the skills section, what are the top 4 priorities that we should be looking for in an ideal candidate profile, right? Going back to our supply chain manager, is procurement more important? Is logistics more important? Are they equally important? What about demand planning? What about systems? What about the tools? How do we rank them? Where's the company today? Do they need new systems? Do they have good systems, right? Do they have a logistics manager and a supply chain manager, right? So we have AI in the background running. We feed it the data that we have gotten, and then it helps us create an ideal candidate profile that we then go through again and tweak. So we make sure that before we start a search, we say, okay, this is what we're looking for in terms of experience. This is what we want in skills. This is the industry background. These are the criteria, and this is the scorecard we're gonna grade candidates on. So when we talk to candidates, right, even from if I talk to somebody today and then I talk to somebody again 3 days later about the same role, if I don't have that, my questions might have shifted, right? Because that's just I've talked to 10 other candidates in the meantime about different roles. So if I don't have that scorecard to keep me honest and to keep me on track, even the same interviewer might change their questions and the parameter of how we evaluate candidates. Right. So for us, I think it's really important to start off with a solid foundation of what are we looking for and how are we grading those candidates. And I think right on the flip side, that's really helpful for organizations to have, because they have multiple people interview candidates. And if the team internally isn't clear on what do we want from this role, and the VP of operation thinks they really need somebody to help them with logistics, but the supply chain director thinks, well, logistics we have pretty much covered, so we really need somebody to help us with demand planning. Well, then we're going to send over candidates that one of them might find really great, and the other one thinks we missed the mark just because internally we didn't have the alignment of, okay, what are our criteria to evaluate candidates? And that's something we run in often. And I think we've started to give that scorecard and ideal candidate profile, share that with our clients, have them write off on it, have them approve it and say, yes, this is what we're looking for, and kind of share that internally. So when we go through the different interview stages, companies have that consistency when talking to candidates to make sure, right, everybody is on the same page.
Yeah, I believe that removal of bias is just absolutely so crucial for these, large companies that we work with that are maybe in the 1 billion-ish revenue space that are growing, because they have so many parts that are moving in their organizations. It is very rare, I feel like, that companies nowadays really sit down and discuss what they're needing out of a role. So keeping that score, or having that scorecard to keep them honest, I feel has really eliminated a lot of wasted time, a lot of back and forth, and has kept everyone aligned on the same goal. And I know you can speak to this, but when we as recruiters feel aligned with the hiring manager and then the executives, I feel like our process just gets boosted so quickly.
Yeah, that's why sometimes, right, it can be challenging to work with those larger organizations. And I know there's certainly some smaller organizations who shy away from it, because working with an owner of a family-owned business, a $50 million company, $100 million company, there's one decision maker, and if that one decision maker says, yes, this is what I want, right? There's not a lot of different opinions. So in some sense, working with smaller organizations and working directly with the decision makers can be easier, but yeah,
Them all.
I think we have, right. We've had great partnerships with Google. We have great partnerships with Cisco and some other larger organizations where we have worked out there usually is a getting to know phase where we kind of work out some of those bugs, where we kind of learn the process, where we kind of make sure, okay, this is how things work. But once you have worked those out, I think obviously those companies just have more roles than the smaller organizations. So getting through those initial hurdles to align our process with their process is worth the hassle. And then if we have companies that are willing to have that dialogue and have that discussion about implementing scorecards and making sure everybody's on the same page, right? Because that's not something we do for us. In the end, we want them to feel like they're getting the best talent
Absolutely.
for their role. Right at the very beginning, we have to talk about what does that look like, what is it, right? And we have to make sure that different managers within the organization don't feel differently about the roles. So having that buy-in from the beginning is, I think, crucial of working effectively with larger organizations. Short of that, right, we just have to learn that bias. And I think that's some brands that takes a little bit of time, where we send over 2 or 3 candidates because we weren't able to have that discussion up front. When we get the feedback from the different hiring managers that are in the process and part of the process, and we can then learn and infer, okay, even so they said logistics isn't that important, the VP thinks logistics is important, so we need to have somebody who is strong across the board. And that's something AI just is not good at all, to infer and to write, read between the lines and finding and then being able to rank those candidates. So yeah, again, to my earlier point, I've seen quite a few, right? AI is being flooded by AI recruiting tools at the moment. I'm getting emails every day about, hey, we have a new AI recruiting tool. And every time I've looked at them and they have ranked candidates, the rankings are basically pointless. I've never seen an AI tool that I felt even closely resembled how I would rank those candidates. So I think that's the hardest part for AI to do, is to look at a resume, look at a profile, and then match it against the criteria that the company have. And it's just because it is so imperfect. Both the data of what the company is looking for is imperfect. The data on the resumes and the profiles is imperfect. So AI is really struggling to connect those two.
Absolutely. And, I think we really hit on a lot of points that this first episode is going to show what is coming in the future. I mean, we talked about the future of supply chain roles when it comes to AI and how the impact AI is going to have on a lot of these tactical roles. We've talked about how organizations remove bias out of their hiring process and how we have implemented that with our clients and seen success. And we've also talked about, of course, scope and our processes. Pretty, what else can the viewers expect going forward in future episodes of Procurement Pulse?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have some great candidates on here, some great guests from VP of supply chains for Fortune 500 companies to heads of HR, VPs of HR. I think we have one lined up for next week, and then some business owners here out of Huntsville, business owners in Alabama that are made in America, and business owners of industries you might not think are doing so well, but they found a niche within those industries to make it work. So I think we have some interesting guests lined up here, and we're going to take a deep dive into really more how AI is impacting supply chain in a more technical sense, and really deep dive into the different solutions, into the different needs that are in supply chain and how AI can solve them, but then also look at how made in America is possible, and talk to HR professionals about what they see in the talent market, what they're looking for in candidates, and how they make sure that the candidates they are hiring fit the organization. So those are the topics we're going to tackle here over the next few weeks: is supply chain, made in America, hiring, career insights. And if you're interested in learning more, stick around.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be very insightful, not only obviously for candidates as we are a recruiting company, but also for hiring managers and business owners and executives to see how you can improve your hiring processes and get actual candid feedback from candidates that are interviewed, out there every day. So I think it'll be great.
If you're in the space and have something real to say, we want you on our podcast. No panels, no polished PR, just a straight up conversation. Reach out and we'll make it happen. Like and subscribe the Procurement Pulse on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Episodes are short, sharp, and built for people who want to stay ahead. This show is powered by Scope Recruiting. We help supply chain teams find and hire the best talent in the market. If you're building, scaling, or have become frustrated with the hiring process, let's talk.